One, recording.
Hi, I'm Alex Chapman, Assistant Principal at Los Gatos High School.
And I'm Carrie Monarchy, Assistant Principal at Saratoga High School.
And we are coming together as a school district, not two different schools, but as a school district for a very important message, that unity makes community. This is a theme that we are going to visit and revisit throughout this year and for future years. We require your patience, your cooperation, and your collaboration as we are all in this together. The purpose of this presentation has a lot to do with over the last decade, the Black Lives Matter movement and the Me Too movements have highlighted the need to do more to combat discrimination, sexual harassment, and sexual violence in our country. Our school district can and should and will play a leadership role in combating discrimination, sexual harassment, sexual violence, and bullying. Each of these issues has a long history in our country and in our communities. We cannot solve these problems ourselves. This is a collective effort. We need your help. We need your assistance. We need your collaboration. Today's conversation and presentation about these topics is just the first step of many steps that we will take in this year and in the coming years to prevent these things from happening and occurring within our schools and in our community.
So the first topic is a pretty weighty topic, and all of the topics that we're going to talk about today, and there are three of them, have to do with psychological safety. And psychological safety is the underpinning of all successful learning for individuals. For sure, they absolutely need to be safe and feel safe in their environments. So it's critical for collaboration and for innovation, and that these are the two main thrusts of our school. So when you walk on campus, you should feel safe and you should make others feel safe. Again, the first topic has to do with sexual harassment and sexual violence. And in any form, those are unacceptable and will not be tolerated at Los Gatos High School nor Saratoga High School. So let's talk for a minute about what is sexual harassment. Well, I think we know what it is to harass somebody. You might have a sibling that you kind of harass, harangue, do something to tease or bother, to annoy. But when it's combined with sexual harassment, it's talking about communication, spoken, written, gestured, or a behavior that is unwanted and sexual. The key word in this definition is unwanted. I can tell you that there have been many times where young people have started relationships and we want these kinds of attentions. But most of the time, if it's unwanted and a person won't back away, won't take no for an answer, then it becomes an issue that you might need some help and support with.
Keep in mind too, our definition of sexual harassment also can include communications by electronic means as well, through social media, through direct messaging. And what's important to understand is that the definition of sexual harassment and what this actually means is really about how it's being received, not how someone intends it to be received. And so that's a very important part that we will talk about several times in this presentation today. General piece of advice that I have given students when we have talked about issues along these lines is that if you are unsure at all as to how your communication, whether that be verbal or whether that's a gesture, if you are unsure about how that might be received by the other person who you are saying it to, or to someone else who might have heard it or listened to it or saw it on a social media post, if you're unsure of how that may be received, it's probably not wise to follow through with that communication. Some examples of sexual harassment include comments about people's bodies, unwanted sexual advances, not taking no for an answer, publicly talking about or showing sexual images, unwanted sexual emails, DMs, chats, text messages, social media, etc. And again, like I just said, the examples of these are not determined by the person making the comment, but by the person hearing the comment or the action or seeing the action. You may not intend to present as sexual harassment, but if the other person perceives it as such, it is considered sexual harassment. It's important to know as well that all of the adults on our two campuses go through extensive sexual harassment training every single year. The information that we're presenting to you is identical to the information that is presented to us as employees of this school district, that we have to follow the same laws and guidelines as we are asking our students, our school community, and our greater community to do the same.
So let's talk a little bit about consent. What we're hoping to do is on our campuses develop what's called a culture of consent. You may have heard that no kind of means yes sometimes. I want to let you know that no means no. So when someone says, hey, you want to go somewhere, you want to do something, and you say no, they should take it as no. If someone says that to you, you need to say, all right, thank you. Consent is explicit permission. It's an agreement between two or more people. It involves communication and setting boundaries. Everyone has the right to decide what another person can do or say about their body, and they can change their mind at any time. So think about consent in a different way. Think about you want to borrow the car from your mom because you want to go to your friend's house. Your mom says, sure, but don't drive over 17 to the beach because it's a dangerous road. If you drive over 17 to the beach, there are consequences. What might happen? You might lose the car. You might lose the privilege. In the case of sexual advancements, relationships, you cross a boundary and you are breaking both ethical and moral and sometimes legal rules that society says we need to abide by, okay? So I think it's important that you know that this is a two-way street in relationships, that consent means you know what the boundaries are, that you ask, that you listen, and that you respond accordingly.
And if I may add, Carrie, exactly to what you said, it is responding to the other person's wishes, and this is out of respect for the other individual involved.
Absolutely. So, so what is consent? Again, we want this culture. It's an understanding that no matter who you are, whatever your gender identity, if you find yourself in a relationship that might become more intimate, that both you and your partner agree on the boundaries, that you and your partner respect those boundaries, and that you and your partner understand your obligations to that partnership, that you understand no means no.
There are laws and regulations around sexual harassment. The Ed Code defines sexual harassment as unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, and other verbal, visual, or physical conduct whereby submission to the conduct is a term or a condition of the individual's academic status or impacts their academic or related decision, or the conduct has the purpose of having a negative impact on the student's academic performance or creates a hostile environment. Basically, what this boils down to is that if any comment that is sexual in nature, that is perceived as harassment, has a negative impact on another individual's academic performance or their feeling of safety at school, then this is a clear violation of Ed Code. And so this is something that we want to just communicate very clearly to all of you, that it's not funny, it breaks the law, and when any individual breaks the law, there are consequences that comes with that, and we take this very seriously. Some consequences related to sexual harassment. Like I said, there are school consequences, which are dictated by the Education Code, the California Education Code, but then there are also laws within our community that in these situations could be broken and may result in police action towards the individual to rectify the situation. So sexual harassment can lead to suspension or expulsion, and this is California Education Code as it is related to school activity or school attendance. Generally, for the first time offense, other means of correction must be attempted. Other means of correction, there's several things that we have the opportunity to do, but are not limited to: community service, removal of extracurricular activities, counseling, etc. And importantly, sexual assault or sexual battery is a mandatory expellable offense, even on the first offense. And that's very important for all school individuals to know, that even on the first offense, and obviously these sort of situations have to be investigated fully, but if it is found that this was an event that did happen, a case of sexual assault or battery, a mandatory expulsion hearing is one of the next steps that will occur for that student if it is committed at school or during a school, during a school activity.
So what can you do? If you're in a situation and it feels unsafe, tell the person to stop. If you can, tell an adult. Parents, teachers, counselors, school administrators can help you. They can intervene on your behalf if you're being harassed. I do want to make a point that everyone understand that staff members at a school, and it's teachers, custodians, all people that work in schools, are what's called a mandated reporter. And it's not that we want to call the police. We don't always want to call the police, but if something is reported to us that is illegal, we are required by law and to keep our credentials to report it. We want to support you. Find a safe individual to talk to. Bring a friend in. But if we hear something that is reportable, we need to report it. If you're uncomfortable telling an adult or a person to stop or approaching an adult, you don't want to be found out, you want to make an anonymous tip, we have a new phone line that you can call called We Tip. And it's a 24/7, 365 days a year phone number, 1-800-78-CRIME. You dial those numbers, you can leave an anonymous tip, and we will get that information. So please take advantage of that. If you are feeling unsafe or you're feeling bothered and you just don't know what to do, call the We Tip phone line. So the other thing is, if you're a bystander, you can become an upstander. We want you to stand up. We want you to speak out. We want you to be a friend to your peers. An upstander, and many of you have heard this term before, is someone who stands up and speaks out when they witness injustice being done to another person. If you're uncomfortable intervening, again, your friend tells you something and you're worried and you don't know what to do and you're afraid to tell their parents, you're afraid to tell your parents, you're afraid to go to the counselor, call the anonymous and confidential line 1-800-78-CRIME. Sometimes it's something you hear from a friend. If it's something you observe, if you notice that someone's getting kind of harassed in the hallways, somebody's picking on another student or following, asking a lot of questions, you're very concerned about the way somebody is overly attached to somebody, and it's not reciprocated, then you might want to give us a call or talk to somebody. That would be really important.
Basically, we are here to help you. As school employees, one of our most important jobs is to support students and protect students. And so we are here as mandated reporters and as caring individuals to work with you, to hear you, to listen to you, and help guide you through a very difficult process in some cases so that you can get the help and support you need. So please take advantage of our time and our resources. And if you're not feeling comfortable in talking directly, please make sure that you use this anonymous opportunity to report this as well. It's important to know that this We Tip hotline does go directly to law enforcement, and law enforcement then filters out the messages that are left to determine what is a crime that would be investigated by law enforcement versus what is a school issue or a school issue, which will be investigated through school employees.
Probably would like to make the point that sometimes social media is perceived as being anonymous. You might be able to post something anonymously, or you think you're anonymous, and somehow miraculously a school administrator finds out about it and calls you in or calls a friend in, and you're like, well, wait a minute, I was anonymous. Well, if an administrator or a teacher or a staff member recognizes a circumstance around a posting, recognizes something that sounds familiar to something that happened last year, they can't just ignore it. It's not something that we can ignore. So we want to support you and we want to help you, and we want you to come in and talk to us. But we understand that it's not that we want to be snoops. But if you put things up anonymous, know that if somebody can connect that to something, that we will come and try to find out what happened and support you through it. That's part of our job.
Correct. All right, we're moving into our next category of topics that we are presenting today. And the next topic is about bullying and cyberbullying. Bullying, especially in schools, is a very serious problem. It has far-reaching impact on students and will not be tolerated at Los Gatos High School nor Saratoga High School. Very similar to harassment and sexual harassment, bullying also has a variety of impacts on students and has a variety of consequences, both within law enforcement and also within school rules and school consequences. So what exactly is bullying and cyberbullying? A core element of bullying includes unwanted aggressive behavior and reflects an observed or perceived power imbalance. And I'd like to repeat again that this is about another person's perception. You may not intend in what you're doing to somebody for this to be bullying them, but if that person perceives it as bullying and feels that way, then it is defined as bullying. And someone else, a third person, may observe this interaction, let's say, between two individuals, and if they perceive that that situation is a power imbalance, then that is considered bullying. So this is something that obviously I'm repeating several times here, is it's very to understand it's really about the perception of the other people, not what you are saying or doing. There are many different modes and types of bullying, and modes can be direct and indirect, physical, verbal, and electronic, whether that be through direct messaging or through social media posts. I want to take just a moment to make sure that everyone is very clear on what the difference is between direct and indirect bullying, where direct bullying is overt and usually much easier to identify, both identifying the bully as well as the person being bullied. It's kind of that classic example of the hallways of, somebody physically intimidating somebody, by overpowering them or cornering them or shoving them up against the lockers and that sort of thing. That is very much direct bullying that is easily observed. What is sometimes difficult to observe is indirect bullying, which can be done anonymously, obviously through electronic means and other ways, and discreetly, and can be subtle and then hard to identify and hard to pinpoint. It's important for everyone to know that both types of bullying, both indirect and direct bullying, whether that is verbal, physical, or electronic, all hurt and humiliate other individuals. Okay, forms of cyberbullying through social media, phone calls, direct messaging, all of this, and that includes bullying, makes an impact on other people's feelings about themselves. And this is what we're trying to address. And again, it is based on the perception of the victim. It's the impact that it has on them, which is important to take note of. So what are some examples of bullying and cyberbullying? And certainly this is not a complete comprehensive list, because that list would be way too long. But these are just the general, some general examples that you are probably all familiar with and have heard about in messaging throughout your schooling. Saying and posting mean and derogatory or hateful names or comments or content about someone else is bullying. If that's done electronically, that is cyberbullying. Saying or posting mean or hateful names, comments about the content of or content about race, religion, ethnicity, gender, perceived sexuality, perceived sexual orientation, that is considered bullying. Threatening to hurt somebody is bullying. Sharing nude photos with somebody can be considered bullying. Lies and false accusations, creating false identities, impersonating somebody else. These are all different forms of bullying. And finally, just a little bit more modern term, doxing is a form of online harassment that is used to exact revenge and threaten and destroy privacy of individuals by making personal private information public. These are just some of the more common ways, I guess, we might say that bullying takes place on school campuses.
Alex, if I could just add one little comment. A lot of times, last year, for instance, I dealt with 3 cases where groups of friends had one person in their group that everyone sort of picked on, not in a mean way, just joking. The person always went along with it, kind of laughed back at it. But at one point it got under their skin and it was no longer funny and it was very hurtful. And so if you notice that in your group, your social groups, there's somebody that is kind of the constant target for the jokes or whatever, and they seem to go along with it. They seem to be happy to be that person, to take that kind of ribbing that they get from everybody. You may want to pause, may want to interrupt it a little bit and check in with the person, because honestly, that could be really hurtful. And then it becomes bullying and it's not even spoken. And it can break up your friendships. And most of the time, the people doing it, they don't mean to be hurting the other person. It's just part of that group mentality and that kind of thing. So just be mindful of the people that you're interacting with and feel free to be an upstander to your friends. I think that's an important thing to remember. It's not always the horrible, nude picture photo kind of thing. It can be more subtle than that. And it can interrupt how they feel about themselves and how they feel at school.
I'm glad you brought that up, Carrie, because I, in my position here at Los Gatos High School, I've had similar conversations with students about their group dynamic. And similar to what you were just describing, sometimes what might just be gentle ribbing or just poking a little fun at first, the person doesn't perceive that as something negative. They're still included in the group. And yeah, I'll take a little fun being poked at me because I'm still part of this group. I'm still part of this friendship group and this social dynamic. But then if that continues over time, that is when I sometimes have students that will approach me and try to talk to me about this, that, at first it was okay because it wasn't that big of a deal. But now that it's gone on for 6 months nonstop and I'm the punching bag for my friendship group, I'm no longer feeling comfortable and safe. And so I think we all have a responsibility within our friendship groups and within the people who we relate to, just as Carrie said, to stand up for those and not allow somebody to be the one person that always has to take kind of the abuse or the ribbing, because that over time can make the person feel different than what they did at the beginning. Great example. Thank you. There are definitely laws and regulations around bullying. The penal code, as well as the education code, both defines bullying as severe or pervasive physical or verbal act or conduct, including communications in writing or by other means or electronic act, and including one or more acts committed by a pupil or group of students that are directed towards one or more pupils. Okay, and then that also can have a that has or can be reasonably predicted to have the effect of one or more of the following, in which I'm going to show you right now. Bullying is the effect that it can have on the individual is placing a reasonable student or students in fear of harm to his or her person or property, or causing a reasonable student to experience a substantially detrimental effect to his or her physical or mental health. In my conversations with our CASI counselors, I know that this is a conversation that many CASI counselors have with students. It is the mental health aspect that bullying and cyberbullying has on students that is a huge concern. and also causing a reasonable student to experience substantial interference with his or her academic performance. What is a long-term effect of bullying on students, and it's been well documented, and I'm sure Carrie and I both see examples of it in our jobs, is that students who are bullied, they avoid coming to school. They avoid interacting at school. And now that we are doing remote learning through Zoom calls and through Google Meets, these are students who are very reluctant to participate out of fear that there's going to be negative bullying messaging coming their way as a result. So as a result, their academic performance goes down. These are the type of effects it has on individuals. And also causing a reasonable student or to experience substantial interference with his or ability to participate in or benefit from the services, activities, or privileges provided by school. So again, if I can summarize this in maybe some more plain language, is that if a student is receiving messages or is having the impact of bullying or cyberbullying that makes them feel fear and substantially has an impact on their mental health and is interfering with their academic performance and is interfering with their ability to participate in anything that we have to offer in these two fine schools, then this is considered bullying by law, by the legal definition, which can have both school consequences and legal consequences. At school, bullying can lead to suspension or expulsion under the California Education Code if related to school activity or attendance. Now, please remember, if there is bullying that is going on, and let's say it's messaging that's happening through social media on a Saturday night in July, that is not during school time. But if as a result of that, that has an impact on a student's ability, their academic performance, or how they feel about themselves, their mental health, or their ability to go to school, then this is a offense against the California Education Code. And again, generally for first-time offenders, other means of correction must be attempted. This is part of the law. And these other means of correction, similar to sexual harassment, can include but not limited to community service, removal from extracurricular activities, counseling, restorative justice, positive behavior support, etc. So how can we collectively, as a school environment, which includes all of the adults, the employees, the students, the school community, their families, how can we address bullying and cyberbullying together to try to put an end to this? What we use in our school district is we use and promote the RIR protocol, recognize, interrupt, and repair. And these are important steps to take in response to microaggressions, these small little comments that maybe you don't think are that big of a deal, but those small little comments can have a significant impact on other individuals. It's important to understand what the RIR protocol really is about. The first step is to recognize it as a microaggression, or recognize it as an act of bullying. Interrupt that act. This is all of our responsibility, to not just let it go on, but to step up, to speak out, and to interrupt it, make it stop. You can even say to someone, excuse me, what did you mean when you said that? That interrupts the act of bullying. And then the last part is the repair, which can sometimes be the most difficult step in the RIR protocol, which is how do you engage with the person who may have said that comment to help them understand the impact that those comments have on somebody? And then how do you engage with the person who is the receiver of those comments? And how do you help repair their state so that they can feel confident to come to school and feel like they are not subject to bullying and cyberbullying? And this is why we support all the individuals involved. It is our responsibility to help teach the bully who is making these comments through the RIR protocol why that is unacceptable, how that has a negative impact on somebody else, and what we can all do about it. We will also continue to provide ongoing training and education for staff and students, which is our continuous work to create empathy within our community. We need to educate and provide information through our peer-to-peer education, CASI, our classes, our academic classes, etc. We will continue to provide training for parents and community members in partnership with our community groups. Both of our schools host film screenings, host guest speakers, have community forums all around these topics. And these are the topics that you will see more often than not in all of these arenas throughout this year and beyond. And finally, as school district employees and as schools employees, we will apply school consequences as appropriate. And we work with law enforcement as necessary if a crime has been committed. So finally, what can you do? Again, be an upstander, not a bystander. You've heard these terms since you were in elementary school. I think all of you, all of us are very aware what that means. It is our responsibility to be an upstander and not just let it happen around us. Okay, so an upstander, again, is someone who stands up and speaks out when they witness injustice being done to another person. It's all of our responsibility to do so. Collectively, if we all do that, we put an end to these types of situations. And if you're uncomfortable intervening, or if it's unsafe at that time for you to intervene, then that's when you need to either get the support from an adult, or you can also, again, use that We Tip line, 1-800-78-CRIME, which you can make a call to that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. You can leave a message on that tip line. And again, that goes to law enforcement, and they basically hear the messages, and they basically will filter out whether that begins with with law enforcement pursuing an investigation, or the school gets provided that information and we start our investigation.
Okay, so those are the first two prongs that we talked about, sexual harassment and assault, bullying and cyberbullying. And the last one, I'm sad to have to talk about it, but I'm actually happy that we get to talk about it because it's something that's long overdue. It's a new day. If you haven't been paying attention to the news about what's going on in the world, there seems to be this seismic shift, an overdue shift in dealing with the issues of discrimination, particularly as it relates to race. As educational organizations, we have a responsibility, we have an obligation to take a leading role in making sure that the shift happens in our schools and trickles out into our community. The district position is that racism, bigotry, and discrimination of any form will not be tolerated or ignored at Los Gatos High School or at Saratoga High School. So I think you could define discrimination. As students, you've heard this before. I do believe that when we look at discrimination, it comes in a lot of different categories. It can be on the grounds of race, age, gender, or sexual identity. We have a long-standing tradition in our country of education, but our educational systems have been built on a foundation that started with a pretty exclusive way of educating people. And it has grown and developed, but it has not been as inclusive as it should be. So not always purposefully. Back in the early days, yes, it was purposeful, but now it's not, but we need to address it. And there's a lot that we can do. So Alex, if you want to advance, there we go. Let's talk about racism because it fits under this discrimination umbrella. And since the death of George Floyd, we have seen that there have been protests in the streets. Some of you participated in it, and magnificently. You're doing the work that needs to be done. So what I really want you to do is make sure that you understand the definitions, because I tell you, I'm an old lady, and I've had to think about this and rethink this a few times. So what is racism? What is racism? It's a belief that racial groups can be culturally and behaviorally inferior to other racial groups. That behaviors, language, policies that either overtly or systematically disparage, belittle, or disadvantage people based on their race. That's racism. I used to think that because I was a good person, I wasn't a racist. So we're going to talk about that in a bit. What is a racist? A racist is one who supports a racist policy or idea through their actions or inactions. So again, if we know better, we can do better, but there's a lot to be done. So let's keep going. We've got some more definitions that we need to deal with. You know what overt racism looks like. I know that you have had enough education, enough experience in our cultures and in your communities in Saratoga and Los Gatos to know that there is certain language, there are certain images when they're attributed to an individual or a group that obviously depict that person in a derogatory way or claim superiority based on race. Institutional racism, also we call it systemic racism, is a form of racism expressed in the practice of social and political institutions. It's not always overt, it's not overt, it's embedded in the things that we learn. It's reflected in disparities regarding wealth and income, criminal justice, employment, COVID. It comes out, you hear it in the news, housing, healthcare, political power, education, and other areas. Institutional racism is less obvious because of its less overt and far more subtle nature. Institutional racism originates in the operation of established and respected forces in the society and thus receives far less public condemnation than individual racism. We're gonna talk a little bit more about this. There's so many layers to racism. You can go ahead and advance. Mr. Chapman, who I've been calling Alex throughout this presentation. Hi, Alex.
Hi.
He talked about microaggressions as it relates to bullying. Microaggressions also relate to racism and discrimination of other groups, any group that's marginalized in some way. So the dictionary definition of microaggression is a comment or action that subtly or often unconsciously or unintentionally expresses a prejudiced attitude toward a member of a marginalized group, such as a racial minority. One of the microaggressions that is actually an overt, you all might think it's a microaggression because you hear it in your language, in your music. Sometimes you hear it in the hallways. A kid might call another kid this term. It's the N-word. The N-word is probably the most inflammatory word in our culture. This is a pejorative. A pejorative, forgive me, I used to be an English teacher. A pejorative is a word or grammatical form expressing a negative connotation. It seeks to demean somebody else. The N-word was created out of white superiority. It should not be used on our campuses unless it's used in an academic context. That means casual use of that word in our hallways, with your friends. You should avoid it. You don't know who's hearing it. You don't know the intent of it. If you haven't been educated enough about its history, you need to pay attention in your history classes to some of that language. I understand the notion to try and reclaim that word by different groups. And so there's differences within the Black community about it. However, on our campuses, this is not a word that we want to hear used casually. So please avoid that. On the opposite end, is being an ally. So if I'm going to be an upstander and I'm going to stand up for what's right, I can do something that's now called allyship. This is a condition of being an ally. So I'm a white person. I can be an ally to a person of color by standing up. A person of color should not have to defend themselves every time. Everybody should rally around and support people if they hear things that they know are wrong. So trying to build allyships and people of understanding. I'm not perfect. I'm going to make a mistake. I'm going to be uncomfortable when I have to say to somebody, again, I'm an administrator. I think I'd just be able to walk right up to a group of kids when I hear the N-word and just say, knock it off. You know what? It's not that easy. And if it's not that easy for me, it's not that easy for you. So I know it's hard, but you have to be able to learn to do it. And how do you do that? Well, it takes a little bit of practice. So if you want to advance the slide, we're going to talk about that in a second, your job and how you can do that. But what can we do as a collective? We have a commitment in the district to do a thorough curriculum review in all core subject areas as it relates to how different perspectives are represented in our curriculum. We're going to provide some culturally responsive lessons during tutorial and during advisory period that you'll hear about as the year unfolds. There's a new rubric about equity and inclusion in our activities that can be used by student groups. So if you're head of a club, you might want to have a look at the rubric. If you're in your ASB at Saratoga or at Los Gatos High School, you might want to look at the rubric and making sure that your activities are as inclusive as they can be. There's a commitment from the adults to holding our students accountable for their words and actions. You as a friend should hold your friends accountable, or people that aren't your friends, right? People you happen to pass in the hallway. That's really hard to do. That's really hard to do. Commitment, we're going to hold ourselves accountable to our own words, policies, and actions. So here, what can you do? Well, Mr. Chapman talked about the RIR protocol. You need to learn it if you don't know it. You need to relearn it. You need to practice it. How do I practice that? Well, practice it with your friends. You know, put yourself in some scenarios. You hear somebody call somebody a derogatory name in the hallway, but they're just joking. They're just kidding. Well, what do? Do that a few times and talk about how you can manage and navigate those situations so that when you face a situation that really needs to be addressed, that you have some confidence behind yourself. I mean, it's like anything, right? The first time I got on a pair of skis and tried to go down a ski slope, I felt like an idiot. I was on my butt the whole way down the hill, right? I was scared to death. But eventually, with some practice, you can learn, right? So you have to be able to practice this. You can join the anti-racism task force at your school. You can read and watch and discuss works from a wide range of perspectives to understand history of racism in our country and the manifestations of it today. You can pay attention and take seriously the lessons that are offered to you during the year. I know, you know, I went to high school in the 1970s, and so it was the decade after the Civil Rights Movement. We had a presenter on a panel in June who said she also went to high school in about the same time, and she happens to be Black, and she thought the Civil Rights Movement had worked, that everything was fixed. I also felt that way, but I went to school with all white people. I had no exposure to anybody of color. I was in a high school that was predominantly, if there was one person of color, I would be surprised. So I led my life for many years thinking that the Civil Rights Movement worked. I didn't have to worry about it. Everybody was treated equally. I was a good person. What changed? Well, cell phones, the internet, news broadcasts. So just like the marches in Selma, those kinds of things got broadcast nationally and changed the political mindset. So did it help to change my mindset. Know that none of us has all the answers, that we're going to be perfect, that we're going to be comfortable, but that what we need to do is try. And like they say in Star Wars, Yoda says, there is no try. We've got to do it. Okay. So laws and regulations. There are laws about harassment, threats, and intimidation directed against other students or staff. They have to be severe or pervasive. They have to be more than one time, unless it's overt. So if it's a really overt image or racist term, a derogatory term that can be considered harassment or threatening or intimidating, then one time is enough. It has the actual and reasonably expected effect of disrupting classwork. Maybe it's a Zoom bomb situation. Creating substantial disorder, creating an intimidating or hostile educational environment. These are considered harassments. Hate violence. In Ed Code, it's causes, attempted to cause, threatened to cause, or participated in an act of hate violence because of a person's disability, gender, nationality, race, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, and or association with a person or group with one or more of these actual or perceived characteristics. So these laws are on the books, and so we need to make sure that we watch ourselves, watch our peers, help the adults be good upstanders themselves, hold people accountable. The consequences for this, harassment, threats, intimidation, and hate violence, can lead to suspension or expulsion under California Education Code if related to school activity or attendance. So if somebody says, I can't come to school because of how I've been treated, and you're the person doing the harm, guess what? You're the one that we're going to call in and have a chat with. Generally, for the first offense, we try to do other things. Restorative justice is a wonderful practice. But you know what? It's really hard for the victim of some kind of racist or bullying or sexual harassment to want to be in the room with the person who's done something to them. At some point, we want you to get back together. We want to restore and repair these relationships. We want everybody to learn and grow. We're in school, right? We're growing. We're not full-grown adults. There's a lot of adults that need this information, by the way, if you haven't noticed in the world. If you could get it now, we could really help our communities. If you can understand this now. Again, you can, if it feels unsafe to you, use the we tip line. Tell an adult. Tell people to stop. Again, it's uncomfortable sometimes, but it's more important that we get it right. So standing up and speaking out is about the only way we can do that. If there's an injustice being done to somebody that you know of, you know, I feel for you. I feel for all of you. I hear it. I hear it on the athletic fields. I hear it in the hallways. I mean, if I hear it, I do something about it. But sometimes you hear it and nobody does anything about it. If you're with a group of peers and there's no adult around, it's up to you. You're the one that has to bring it to somebody's attention. If you can't say it to the person who's doing it themselves, get an adult involved. Call the we tip line. So for our ongoing work, we're going to continue to listen to student voice. We have several students who are highly engaged in one of the different groups, the Culture of Consent movement, Anti-Racism Task Force. We're going to send a letter home to your families that reinforces the conversation that it's not really been a conversation. I really apologize. Would have been great to have you live with us, but just for the sake of getting all of this information to you, we decided to record. There will be ongoing trainings that will be given throughout the year. So at that point, maybe the smaller groups will allow us to have some conversations about these things. You may have some feelings that came up during this conversation. Feel free to email either one of us, your guidance counselors, anybody, a teacher, and I would love to have a conversation with anybody about this. We'll monitor, follow up on the calls that are made to the we tip line that come to us. And that students who would like to be more involved should reach out to your site administration. At this point, we're going to close a little bit. We're going to listen to some words from the Congressman John Lewis. And I think what he does is he beautifully captures the notion that we need to be upstanders. He was an upstander. He did what we wanted all of us to be able to do. That was an amazing strength. So just follow along as you hear his words.
While my time here has now come to an end, I want you to know that in the last days and hours of my life, you inspired me. You filled me with hope about the next chapter of the great American story when you used your power to make a difference in our society. Millions of people, motivated simply by human compassion, laid down the burdens of division. Around the country and the world, you set aside race, class, age, language, and nationality to demand respect for human dignity. That is why I had to visit Black Lives Matter Plaza in Washington, though I was admitted to the hospital the following day. I just had to see and feel it for myself, that after many years of silent witness, the truth is still marching on. Emmett Till was my George Floyd. He was my Rayshard Brooks, Sandra Bland, and Breonna Taylor. He was 14 when he was killed, and I was only 15 years old at the time. I will never, ever forget the moment when it became so clear that he could easily have been me. In those days, fear constrained us like an imaginary prison, and troubling thoughts of potential brutality committed for no understandable reason were the bars. Though I was surrounded by two loving parents, plenty of brothers, sisters, and cousins, their love could not protect me from the unholy oppression waiting just outside that family circle. Unchecked, unrestrained violence and government-sanctioned terror had the power to turn a simple stroll to the store for some Skittles or an innocent morning jog down a lonesome country road into a nightmare. If we are to survive as one unified nation, we must discover what so readily takes root in our hearts that could rob Mother Emanuel Church in South Carolina of her brightest and best, shoot unwitting concert goers in Las Vegas, and choke to death the hopes and dreams of a gifted violinist like Elijah. Like so many young people today, I was searching for a way out, or some might say a way in. And then I heard the voice of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on an old radio. He was talking about the philosophy and discipline of nonviolence. He said we are all complicit when we tolerate injustice. He said it is not enough to say it will get better by and by. He said each of us has a moral obligation to stand up, and speak out. When you see something that is not right, you must say something. You must do something. Democracy is not a state. It is an act, and each generation must do its part to help build what we call the beloved community, a nation and world society at peace with itself. Ordinary people with extraordinary vision can redeem the soul of America by getting in what I call good trouble, necessary trouble. Voting and participating in the democratic process are key. The vote is the most powerful nonviolent change agent you have in a democratic society. You must use it because it is not guaranteed. You can lose it. You must also study and learn the lessons of history because humanity has been involved in this soul-wrenching existential struggle for a very long time. People on every continent have stood in your shoes through decades and centuries before you. The truth does not change, and that is why the answers worked out long ago can help you find solutions to the challenges of our time. Continue to build union between movements stretching across the globe because we must put away our willingness to profit from the exploitation of others. Though I may not be here with you, I urge you to answer the highest calling of your heart and stand up for what you truly believe. In my life, I have done all I can to demonstrate that the way of peace, the way of love and nonviolence is the more excellent way. Now it is your turn to let freedom ring. When historians pick up to write the story of the 21st century, let them say that it was your generation who laid down the heavy burdens of hate at last, and that peace finally triumphed over violence, aggression, and war. So I say to you, walk with the wind, brothers and sisters, and let the spirit of peace and the power of everlasting love be your guide.
So as representatives of Los Gatos High School and Saratoga High School, Mrs. Monike and I would like to thank you very much we know this has been a lengthy presentation, and again, repeating what Mrs. Monike had said, that we would, in other circumstances, love to have made this something more personal that we can engage in. We realize that this is heavy subject matter, but this is critically important to our school environments. And so I would just like to thank everyone for listening to this presentation, thinking very carefully about yourselves, thinking very carefully about your schools, thinking very carefully about your community, how we support each other, and how we move forward in some of these wonderful words from John Lewis. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chapman. And I would also like to say thanks for sticking with us. I know that Zooming for hours on end are rough, But this is important. This is our life's work. This is, you know, I think John Lewis is so right about the work of your generation. You have an opportunity to make a difference. And it's your voice. It's the voice of the youth that often swings the nation. So please feel free to speak up and to stand up. Thanks for joining us. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.